Tonight, Israel confirms it has killed the head of Hamas.
The mastermind of this day of sheer evil is no more.
Yahya Sinwar, an architect of the October 7th attacks and one of Israel's top targets, could his death change the trajectory of the war?
We're determined to try and seize that opportunity.
From CBC News, this is The National with Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault. Thank you for joining us tonight. Israeli officials have confirmed the leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, is dead. The man who helped spark a war now into its second year and still burning through the Middle East. Sinwar was the accused architect of the October 7th massacre, killing nearly 1,200 in Israel and kidnapping about 250 hostages. Since then, Gaza health officials say Israel has killed more than 42,000 people in the Strip. Most reportedly women, children, and the elderly. Israel.
Starting off great. The 1,200 people killed on October 7th, about 400 of them were security personnel. 42,000 in response to that seems to be a little bit disappropriate. I'm not a math genius or anything, though.
Israel has always said the target is Hamas. Sinwar himself among the most important of all. Friar Stewart now with the celebrations in Israel, the response in Gaza, and what could potentially come next.
Across Israel, celebrations after the news that Yahya Sinwar had been killed.
My wife told me that Sinwar was killed, and the first time I said, bring the whiskey, we'll drink l'chaim for it.
The Israeli military says this video from a drone flying in southern Gaza shows Sinwar just before his death. He appears immobile, but at one point throws something to try and knock down the drone. Israel says he was later killed, his body transferred to Tel Aviv and identified in part by old dental records.
Today, the mastermind of this day of sheer evil is no more.
But Sinwar was the architect of the October 7th massacre, part of it captured by militants in this video as they murdered around 1,200 people and took about 250 hostage. And now their families fear what could come next.
This is a critical, time-sensitive development as it relates to the hostages. Their lives are in great danger now, more than ever.
Israeli officials say Sinwar wasn't bound near any hostages. He spent most of the last year hidden in Gaza's vast network of tunnels. Even as the death toll in Gaza mounted, he was unwilling to stop Hamas's fight against Israel. In Gaza, there appeared to be little shock over his death. Big and small leaders were killed in Palestine's journey for revolution, said this man to a videographer working for CBC News. In Ramallah, in the occupied West Bank, some people told us that they were too afraid to give their opinions. Others said Sinwar was a strong leader. It's a great loss for the Palestinian people, an assassination, says this man.
I saw my friend's mom. She was crying because what happened. It's really a bad thing and everyone will get emotional first.
Just what happens next is far from clear.
This war can end tomorrow. It can end if Hamas lays down its arms and returns our hostages.
If not, Israel's prime minister says it will continue full force. But Washington sees Sinwar's death as an opening.
We believe it is an opportunity to try and bring an end to this war, and we're determined to try and seize that opportunity.
But there has been optimism before about deals that never came together, and an end to the war that has killed tens of thousands. As for any potential ceasefire deal, Qatar, which has been moderating the talks, says that there hasn't been any negotiations in about 3 to 4 weeks.
So, Briar, in a way, does this change anything?
I think there is a lot of uncertainty. Sinwar was an obstacle. He was against the ceasefire deal, but he was a known
That is just a blatant lie. Sinwar is not against the ceasefire deal. That is a fucking absurd, just outright, full cloth lie. Just incorrect, false. Hanea was also for ceasefire. And what did they do to him? Killed him. Sinwar That was the point of the hostages, was to get a ceasefire. Why would he take hostages if there wasn't a point for a ceasefire? That is just blatantly fucking incorrect.
Quantity, he was in charge and it was his decision to make. Now with him gone, it's not really clear who mediators would be negotiating with and whether that person would have full control over the militants that are still left on the ground.
The fact is that there was negotiating going on before Sinwar became like the full-fledged leader, which was Hanea, and they killed him. So like, I don't get what the fuck they're even trying to say with that. It doesn't even make sense. Like, anyone who has even any understanding about how this conflict, fucking genocide has occurred, knows that that doesn't make any sense. We're about 2 minutes in here and my brain is already broken.
All right, Briar Stewart in Jerusalem tonight. Thanks, Briar. All right, let's go to senior international correspondent Margaret Evans, who's in London now. Margaret, there is talk, at least from Washington, about this maybe being an off-ramp to peace.
We're not hearing that from Benjamin Netanyahu. He said it. We will not stop the war. So he's already at odds with the White House, with the Biden-Harris administration, who are saying they see this as an opportunity to reopen negotiations that would see the hostages come home and an end to the suffering that we're witnessing amongst Palestinians. Netanyahu has also been clear all along, saying that he doesn't believe negotiations are the way to get the hostages home. That, he says, will come through military might.
How has that worked for you so far? They've killed numerous hostages with that military might.
Won't stop the war until Hamas is destroyed. And we don't really know what his metric is for measuring that.
There isn't any. That's why he chose that, because he knows that there isn't a way to destroy them and that his power is contingent on there being a war that he is the head of state. And that's why, because there is no KPI for what destroying Hamas is. The seeds have been planted.
The unknown, of course, is what is Israel's plan for the day after for Gaza? Is it going to be a military occupation? And within Netanyahu's own cabinet, there's pressure from hard-line nationalists who would like to see Gaza resettled by Israel.
And Margaret, tonight, obviously, there's also a lot of anxiety about the fate of those remaining hostages in Gaza.
Yeah, they're really in potentially a very perilous situation. The Hamas command and communications are going to have been disrupted by this. There are different groups likely holding them. There is a potential for panic. And we're seeing Israeli politicians calling for the government to make it clear.
How much do you want to bet that they don't bring up what the potential danger this might have for the people of Palestine, that and Israel's seeing the population as vulnerable and punishing them further? Because, 42,000 people have been killed in Palestine, in Gaza, since October 7th. And then we're talking about hostages. The fate of these hostages is not important, but in contrast to 42,000, which, 42,000 is the lowest of low estimates as far as how many people have died. So, yeah, the comparison of the two is just absurd. And it just shows the white colonial narrative that's being perpetuated on this news channel consistently throughout this entire.
That there is safe passage, potentially reward money for anyone delivering hostages to safety. If there is a chance for a negotiation with a good outcome, potentially, it's going to rely on Sinwar's replacement being much more willing to compromise than he apparently was.
It's just not true. And I'm going to talk about it, but Sinwar was never against a ceasefire. Again, why the fuck would you take hostages if it wasn't to negotiate a ceasefire? It's just factually incorrect. They're just putting their name behind reporting that is false.
All right, Margaret Evans in London. Thanks, Margaret. more on Yahya Sinwar, you can go to cbc.ca/The National. There you can see Terence McKenna's profile of the Hamas leader, including interviews with those who knew him and a deep dive into his rise in Hamas and his role in October 7th.
A key moment leading up to the present Gaza crisis came in 2011, when in exchange for a single Israeli...
What's funny too, just for full disclosure, is that this is a video that was produced in December of 2023. So shortly after October 7th. But they didn't even bother to re-up this. This is just the same propaganda that they put out about Sinwar after October 7th. So let's watch and see how absurd this is. And then we'll go into a bit of a fact check about Sinwar and who he was and what he represented.
A key moment leading up to the present Gaza crisis came in 2011, when in exchange for a single Israeli soldier kidnapped by Hamas, the Israelis released over 1,000 prisoners from their jails, none more famous than Yahya Sinwar. He had been incarcerated for 22 years after being sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms for murder. He was given a hero's welcome in Gaza and was quickly reintegrated into the Hamas leadership. In 2017, he was appointed to replace the outgoing Hamas leader in Gaza, Ismail Haniyeh, and he was reappointed to that post in 2021. He never made a secret of his elaborate plans to have thousands of Hamas fighters attack Israel, which he called the Jewish entity.
He never said the Jewish entity there. He said the entity. He never even said Israeli. They put Israeli in the transcript themselves.
Ehud Yari has been a television journalist and author in Israel for over 50 years. He wrote the first biography of Yasser Arafat. He regularly visited prominent Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails. He interviewed Yahya Sinwar 4 times.
He was always, wherever he was sent, he became in no time the leader of all the prisoners, whether they Hamas or Fatah or any other organization, because of his domineering personality and his ruthlessness. People became either fans of him or were too afraid of him.
Hussein Ibn.
It's just so absurd. I think maybe because he was we'll get into it, but his ruthlessness, right? In the face of him being in prison amongst a bunch of people who had not been charged or tried or anything, but yet he's the ruthless one.
Bush is senior resident scholar at the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington. He says Sinwar wanted the massive Israeli counterattack that has killed thousands of Palestinian civilians.
What? How is this? I would love to.
They have said not only do they want a permanent state of war with Israel, but if October 7th had not provoked this reaction, they would have tried again and again until they got this reaction.
It's just straight up not true. He's made, again, they're just straight up lying. These are just straight up lies. There is no perpetual war with Israel is not. No, it's just.
Because the ultimate aim is to lure Israel back into the Gaza Strip in a permanent way and to attack the Israelis in an insurgency that goes on day in and day out. So they can say to the other Palestinians and the Arab world, we are the national movement. We are fighting occupation forces every day for control over Palestinian land here in Gaza.
That's just whole cloth false.
Joe Truzman at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies has closely followed Sinwar's career.
In 2022, he stated publicly that if Palestinians do not have a gun, that they should use cleavers and axes to kill Jews. All right. Now, you can...
No, occupiers, actually. Again, to see how they're, they are reframing the things and to say, like, to kill Jews internationally, to kill Jews all around the world. But he's not saying that. He's saying occupiers. It's just whole cloth false. It's what all of this is. I don't even know if I'm going to be able to get through this whole video. It's 10 minutes long. We have 7 minutes left.
At the time, you could say, oh, that's just rhetoric. He doesn't really mean it. But he doesn't. Look what happened October 7th.
He was very clear that the state of Israel should be destroyed and the Jews cannot be a part of a Palestinian state.
Back in the 1980s, Sinwar was an acolyte of Hamas founder Sheikh Yassin, the quadriplegic religious leader. He had said that Yassin charged him with rooting out traitors and collaborators in the Hamas movement. At his 1989 trial in Israel, Sinwar confessed to murdering a suspected collaborator named Ramzi in the graveyard of his Gaza hometown of Khan Yunis. He said, "We didn't tell Ramzi what we were going to do. While we interrogated him, we didn't beat him much. I blindfolded him with a rag so he couldn't see. I put him inside a large grave and strangled him with the kafia I had. After strangling him, I wrapped him in a white shroud and closed the grave. I was sure that Ramzi knew he deserved to die."
We're talking about a person who was a collaborator with Israel amidst the occupation. Like Sinwar, the butcher of Han Yunis, is probably what they're going to bring up here, which is, again, wholesale false.
He said, Palestinian victim knew that he deserved to be choked. The guy is a shrewd, cunning, sophisticated psychopath.
I think he's a vicious guy. I think he's one of these people who might have been a gangster in other circumstances, right? He's
Like, you can say the same thing about Netanyahu. Netanyahu is absolutely, like, the numbers are just, it's not even comparable to the amount of people that Netanyahu has seen murdered, innocent lives killed, in comparison to Sinwar or anybody on the Palestine liberation side. This is fucking absurd news content. It's just purely colonial propaganda.
certainly has this violent streak. There's no doubt. He thinks in a violent way.
During his prison years, Sinwar used the time to learn Hebrew. He said it was to better understand his enemy. Shortly before he was released, he gave an interview in Hebrew to Israeli TV, during which he claimed that he was now prepared to turn the page and work towards a 50-year ceasefire in the region.
That's interesting, because didn't they just say that he was against a ceasefire?
העמדה שלנו שאנחנו נתמוך בכל דבר שירגיע את האזור. I think Sinwar's been playing this ruling for a long time. He pulled the Israeli prison authority into allowing him to be released, or putting him on the list to be released from the Gilad Shalit deal. And now look what happened. And also in the last couple of years, he made it out like Hamas wasn't interested in conflict with Israel.
He knows Israel. He is watching Israeli television. He reads the Israeli press. He knows the nuances between politicians and parties. And
This guy is just a straight up blood-sucking fascist. That's very evident already. The other guy is clearly just a shill who's taking a paycheck. Or he'll make any argument that he can for whoever's giving him the most amount of money.
all sorts of influencers on social media, etc. He considers himself an expert on Israel.
In 2021, Sinwar launched a wave of rockets from Gaza to rain down on Israeli civilians. The Israelis responded by bombing the famous Gaza tunnels, and they destroyed Sinwar's house and office with airstrikes.
And then what did he do? Also, how many civilians did they murder in contrast to that, in response to the bombing of Israel, who was an occupying force.
After he negotiated a truce,
There's the famous photo.
Sinwar claimed victory and posed for this photo in his destroyed house, a brilliant public relations move that added to his popularity in the Arab world.
For him, Gaza can be destroyed, half destroyed. You don't measure it.
Like numerous quotes of this guy who is, it's just so absurd. To say that he wants Gaza destroyed and that it makes no difference to him is just a wholesale lie.
As long as Hamas bleeding, even humiliated, stands on its feet, it's a victory.
Is it possible that Sinwar has miscalculated, that this war could turn the population of Gaza against Hamas? Hussein Ibish thinks that could happen.
It requires Israel to leave Gaza and allow Hamas to crawl out of the rubble and declare divine victory. At that moment, and for the months, weeks and months after that, it will become hard for Gazans not to have a debate. What happened here? Why did they do that? They knew it was going to happen, and they brought this on us. What did we gain? What have we lost? This is insane. And they are horrendous and get extremely angry with Hamas.
Completely hearsay, completely, I have no idea what you're talking about. The vast majority of the people, like who put them in power, like the vast majority of people support the resistance. Like,
On November 4th, the Israeli Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, announced that his forces had Sinwar surrounded in an underground bunker, unable to communicate with his Hamas troops. Yahya Sinwar has always been conscious of the target on his back, according to Ehud Yari.
He always makes a point of being surrounded by children to deter the Israelis from going after him.
the human shield. Like, give me a goddamn break.
Because he's a target, obviously. He knows, and I think he accepts it, that he has to run for his life for the rest of his days.
Yeah, because that's what he did. He ran for his life for the rest of his days, except he fought by himself to the very end. No, that's not what happened.
I think he understands at the end, the Israelis will get him. Doesn't matter where he is. He can be in the bunker for a year, for 2, for 3. At one point, the Israelis will get him.
I agree with that. I think this is October 7th. All the authors of October 7th believed they were signing their death warrant. Israel has clearly decided to kill everyone involved in October 7th. And I'm pretty sure they'll be able to do that. Yahya Sinwar signed his death warrant.
Again, those are contradictory statements. If he said that he knew that he was going to die, that he signed his death warrant, he knew that he was going to die. But then the guy just before him said that he was going to have to run for the rest of his life. So which is it? Is he going to run for the rest of his life, or does he know his faith and is willing to face it like they just said, which is just garbage, desperate propaganda.
As he has done many times in the past, in October, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu swore vengeance against Hamas leaders, whom he referred to as dead men. He recently called Sinwar a little Hitler.
Like, what is he right? What is Netanyahu if Sinwar is a little Hitler? Like, again, look at the body count. The innocent people that have been killed under fucking Netanyahu's command. Like, it's incomparable.
In his deal with the Israeli government, Sinwar settled for a 3-to-1 ratio in his trade of civilian hostages. He is expected to be much tougher in negotiations for Israeli military captives, if not at the over 1,000-to-1 ratio that brought about his own release 12 years ago.